Volodymyr Zelenksyy says around 100 Ukrainian civilians have been evacuated from the Azovstal steelworks in the city of Mariupol. It comes after the United Nations confirmed a safe passage operation was in progress there. With a ceasefire in place, civilians are emerging and leaving the city. Meanwhile, Russia said it destroyed several military facilities in Ukraine. Sergio Olmos has more from Lviv.
We're hearing developing news about a humanitarian corridor for the besieged residents of Mariupol. At least 100 people have been able to be evacuated from Mariupol. There's been multiple attempts to try to evacuate civilians over the past couple of weeks. They've all failed. Ukrainian officials have been very suspicious of Russian armed forces, articulating that the Russian armed forces aren't abiding by humanitarian corridor agreements, either firing on civilians or, in some cases, setting up their own humanitarian corridors that they fear could lead into Russia. But the news today of at least 100 people being able to be evacuated it can be credited largely to the visit by the world's top diplomat, Antonio Guterres, who visited President Zelensky specifically to help with this humanitarian corridor in Mariupol.
Today, we finally managed to start the evacuation of people from Azovstal. After many weeks of negotiations, after many attempts, different meetings, people, calls, countries, proposals, finally. I hope that tomorrow all the necessary conditions will be met to continue the evacuation of people from Mariupol. We plan to start at 8 a.m.
The third highest ranking politician in the United States, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, made a surprise visit to Kyiv to discuss the ongoing military and economic aid being supplied to Ukraine to help repel the Russian invasion. This comes on the back of two high-ranking U.S. officials meeting with President Zelensky, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And it comes as the White House announced a $33 billion package to help support Ukraine, $20 billion of which would be slated for defense. They met to discuss specific ways, specific armaments, and specific humanitarian aid that could be given to Ukraine. We're continuing to see heavy fighting all across the Eastern Front, heavy shelling in Kyiv and Luhansk, where the governor says that on Monday the entire region was out of electricity due to heavy shelling. And in Odessa, a runway struck by a missile, rendering that runway obsolete. No casualties.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the upcoming anniversary of Russia's liberation at the end of World War II will have no bearing on Moscow's military operations in Ukraine. Meanwhile, U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has pledged continued U.S. support for Ukraine after meeting Zelensky in an unannounced visit to Kyiv. William Denslow reports.
This, of course, significantly comes in a weekend where we've also heard remarks from Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, speaking to the Xinhua news agency, where he said that he wanted to see sanctions from the West eased in order, really, as a key stipulation for peace talks to go forward. He also said, crucially, that he wanted to see, as well as a number of other demands that he laid out, but he wanted to see a ceasing of NATO and Russia and Ukrainian allies of supplying weapons and military hardware to Ukraine. So these comments from Nancy Pelosi, as well as Adam Schiff, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, very much run incredibly counter to that. Significantly, of course, this comes as Russia says that any weaponry that enters Ukraine from the likes of NATO and Ukraine allies will be subject to Russian missiles and be targeted. The message from President Biden is that he's seeking an extra $33 billion in aid for Ukraine, and he's seeking to seize assets from Russian oligarchs as a way to pay for Ukraine's development. According to the World Bank, some $60 billion in damage already done in Ukraine over the past couple of months of this war. We have, of course, had a very strong message from the Kremlin saying this sets a very dangerous precedent, adding that this is a blatant distortion of international law. So you can expect a strong response from Russia. They're chair of the Duma, Russia's parliament, so a senior member of Moscow's parliamentary branch, stating that there will be a tit-for-tat action, saying that there will be a mirror-like response from Moscow.
Now, Turkish presidential spokesperson Ibrahim Kalin says continuing the Istanbul process can play a key role in ending the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. It came after Karlin met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenksyy in Kyiv on Saturday. And Karlin told Turkish media that the primary objective is to end this conflict through negotiation and dialogue. Turkey had gathered Russian and Ukrainian officials together in Istanbul in March, but no breakthrough could be achieved.